All right, no surprises that legislation, as Cam just said, is through the House. Of course, they've got the numbers. The real fight's now in the Senate. And I have to say, in Senate estimates this week, Labor and the bureaucrats, well, they've not covered themselves in glory. First up, it was the Treasury Secretary who couldn't say what modelling had been done.
Got an answer? Have you actually modelled this? Have you got something quantitative?
There is really mixed empirical evidence about whether changes to tax arrangements, such as capital gains tax.
Can I just get a clue? We've only got 5 minutes to go. I'm just struggling a little. Sorry, Secretary. Have you modelled? Have you estimated the impact of these tax changes, the big ones, capital gains, negative gearing, trusts, on productivity?
So we have assessed that these would move the system towards an allocation of capital which is more consistent with where economic returns would suggest that investment should take place.
Do these tax changes materially reduce personal income tax rates for Australians?
So these tax changes reduce personal income taxes for most Australians in relation to the Working Australian Tax Offset and the instant deduction.
All right, that's just blather. That's public servants' blather to obscure the facts. Then there was this from the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher.
Was there a rushed process for these tax reforms?
It was a busy budget session, you know, like it always is.
So, yes, it was a rushed process.
No, I'm not saying that.
Look at her flick through her notes. I mean, she's the one who couldn't tell you whether the budget savings were net savings or gross savings. They are not across the brief. Joining me now for the wrap-up of that fortnight, as I said, One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby and Sky contributor Carolee Katzenbartis. Well, James, you know, you and I have sat through a lot of these estimate hearings. They've had a shocker of the last fortnight, but a lot of these, they are deliberately obtuse. They do not want to give us the detail, perhaps because they don't want us to know what they would have put in these bills, but I don't actually think they've got them ready to even legislate properly.
G'day Australia. See this. The Prime Minister stands at the dispatch box, announces the most significant tax shake-up in a quarter of a century, and within days it turns out he personally banked well over $1 million from the exact kind of property gains he's now closing off for everyone else. You could not write this. Actually, you could because it just happened. Quick favour before we dive in. If you're enjoying this breakdown, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Most of you watching right now haven't subscribed yet, and it costs nothing, takes about a second, and genuinely helps this channel keep digging into stories the big networks gloss over. Cheers if you did. Now, let's get into it.
No, the blame game has begun. Treasury want those guys to take the blame, and the government want those guys to take the blame. No one's prepared to stick their hand up and say, yeah, we're responsible for what is being passed through Parliament today. Meanwhile, Anthony Albanese has sold $5 million, 3 properties over the recent years. Now, if my stockbroker did that, he'd be done for insider trading, because he would know very well that he, you know, if he had done the wrong thing, knowing full well that a company that he had shares in was about to plummet or changes were going to take place, he'd be done for insider trading. And here we've got a Prime Minister who has sold off these investment properties, $5 million worth, and he's not going to be subjected to these changes to capital gains tax or anything else that this government had brought in. He knew very well what he was going to do down the track, and he safeguarded his own self-fortune while putting everybody else who tried to get ahead just that little bit further, Peter. He's put them under the bus. And meanwhile, he's thrown everyone else under the bus as well, even Treasury.
They think they're too clever by half, Carolee, because they've put the nasties, the CGT and property tax changes, in the same bit of legislation where people get the $250 sort of tax break per annum. I mean, it's what, 60 cents a day, but nonetheless, they've put the two measures together. They really should be in 2 separate bills, but they put them all together, and they think they're tricky because at night most of the commercial TVs will run the headline that, you know, the Coalition, the Liberals and One Nation voted against these tax breaks, but they actually voted against the terrible tax hikes. But the government, you know, beautiful on the politics, terrible on the policy.
Definitely. Look, I think that when you've got both sides of politics, people from all sides that are actually disagreeing, it shows that these are terrible, toxic taxes, and there needs to be an open Senate inquiry to get to the bottom of it. Because, as you said, they're just hoping on a headline that it will all get through. The bottom line is they've lied to the Australian people. I don't care what Milton Dick, the Speaker, may classify as a lie or not. They didn't take this to an election. This is not what Australians have actually voted for, and it's not going to make life any better for younger Australians or older Australians. There are some horrific things that they've done, and no, it doesn't give them a mandate to just ram through a whole heap of things. So I think a good open Senate inquiry will at least uncover a lot of what's going on.
Labor thinks you're pretty cruel on those non-citizens who are accessing a taxpayer-funded deposit scheme, that you and the Liberals somehow hate migrants. But I think most Australians out there would say, if you haven't signed up to be an Australian citizen, well, you don't get to sign yourself up to our welfare or taxpayer support either. I mean, 1 in 5, James, revealed by Claire O'Neill today in Question Time, is accessing this scheme. 1 in 5, and they don't even have Australian citizenship.
Back in May, the government dropped its budget bombshell: negative gearing capped for new purchases and changes to the capital gains tax discount that inquiry after inquiry had been circling for years. Sounds bold on paper, except the Prime Minister himself had already pocketed roughly $1 million in capital gains from selling investment properties in the years prior, using the very tax settings he was now dismantling for everyone coming up behind him. When challenged about it in Question Time, his explanation was that his mother told him to buy a house in his 20s. Lovely sentiment, doesn't quite answer why the ladder gets pulled up right after he's climbed it. Here's the bit that should really get your attention, though. It's not just what changed, it's how it changed. A Senate inquiry into the capital gains tax discount handed down its findings before the budget even landed, giving the Treasurer political cover to move. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? And when questions were asked about whether proper economic modelling was actually done before slicing into negative gearing and the CGT discount, the answers got mysteriously vague. Nobody in Canberra seems keen to put their hand up and say, yes, this was our modelling, these are our numbers, here's our reasoning. It's a bit like being handed a lucky dip bag and being told to trust that what's inside is definitely good for you. Existing property owners get grandfathered in, meaning nothing changes for people who already hold investments. It's only new buyers stepping in from here who face the tighter rules. So the people already sitting comfortably keep sitting comfortably while the next generation gets a different rulebook entirely. Sound familiar? It's the oldest trick in the political playbook. Change the game just as you're about to win it.
No, look, I will say there are 1.2 million thereabouts people who are permanent residents in this country. In other words, they've been given the permanent residency to stay here. The next step is obviously citizenship. They've just got to go through that process. But for these people, some of these people had been sitting in no man's land with that permanent residency status now for a couple of decades. I know of plenty of POMs that come out here 30, 40 years ago and are still only permanent residents, but they've never taken that oath. And I think you can't be half pregnant. You either want to be Australian, therefore go through the process, and therefore you can enjoy the spoils of what we as taxpayers and the government are putting forward. Maybe we've got to put a time limit on what the process is. It's like I've often said, it's like engagement.
Oh, I like
the next
that
step
idea.
is marriage. The next step is marriage. And if you're not prepared to make the full commitment, well, I'm sorry, you might as well call it off. I think put a time limit on that on that permanent residency. You either commit to this country, otherwise do not get the benefits of Medicare and everything else that comes with it.
Let's go to the One Nation poll, Carolee. Women, wealthy and city voters, so the so-called progressives, are now all moving One Nation's way. There's been a huge jump actually in relation to women, from 6% to 24%. Now, I have to say, if you look at where these seats are falling, the Teals should be worried. But I'll also make the broader point. Pauline Hanson hasn't gone out there and announced all these special policies for women, because you and I, Carolee, as you know, we argue that women want the same things as the men do. We want a good economy. We've got national security. We haven't had to be tempted with a policy with a pink cover on it to get our vote. They look at Pauline, they see consistency, they see strength, they see resilience. Maybe that's what's getting them over the line. But this will be worrying those Teals, let me tell you.
Well, the bottom line is Pauline has been as she has been for 30 years, but women are actually realising that what she's saying is actually true. And I think the display by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner Anna Cody the other day just showed how ridiculous it has now been. A lot of these women have daughters, they have nieces. They're actually aware that women are being eradicated in society because of all this murkiness about this gender transition and all these rights and trans and everything, and women are just being completely written out of it. And so no wonder when you've got somebody like Pauline, she's a mum herself, she speaks plain language, she's also an aunt, when she actually says what most women have identified with for 20 years, then what can you say? And I know that Julia Gillard has been in an article going on and on about her misogyny speech, etc. That woman's got a real hide because she effectively wrote women out of the Sex Discrimination Act. And I'm actually fed up of reading about that one-line trick pony of the misogyny, and she never experienced sexism or misogyny till she was Prime Minister. You know what? The issue that needs to be said is what she said. There will never be a carbon tax under the government I lead. If all she's got to hang her hat on is that ridiculous line that she said that was deflection away from a dreadful government that she led, then I'm a monkey's uncle. And I'll just add one more thing. She actually professes this love and admiration for Barack Obama. She needs to go back to history. In 2011, the withdrawal from Iraq of Barack Obama led to the security vacuum which allowed ISIS to flourish, and the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran has actually paved the way for all the issues that are here and that Trump is trying to clear up.
James, Ashby and I were insiders to that whole misogyny speech. I think at another time, James, you and I might just have a bit of a chat about that so people can understand what really went on. I think that would be important. But these are your women coming across. These are wealthy, inner city types that are now voting for One Nation, if the polls are to be believed. Give me your take on what's driving them over.
Well, I get a sense that most women today are those that pay the grocery bill. They're seeing those prices shoot up. They're paying the insurance bill. They're paying typically to have the car refuelled. They are paying every extraordinary, excessive bill that has been driven up by what has been inflationary, that has seen prices just escalate because of this green dream as well. Net zero has driven things as well. And I agree with Carolee in the sense that it is the mums, as well as the dads, that are concerned about their young daughters in school, where boys are entering girls' toilets, where men are entering women's sport, and this whole ideology that's been taught at universities and beyond, even in the workplace, particularly in government workspaces and the ABC, it's concerning. And women are now starting to, prick their ears and go, hang on a second, this is not right. What happened to the promises that this government made where they said things would get cheaper under them? And there's been less transparency and you can't speak out against it. That's what's concerning women, and they're really terrified about the future for their young children themselves.
And the Prime Minister better be careful. Women don't like blokes who lie to us. I think that's what's got a lot of women's backs up. Absolutely that lie.
Now, let's shift gears, because tax isn't the only place where the rule book feels like it's being rewritten mid-match. There's a bigger, murkier question bubbling away underneath all of this. Who exactly is entitled to what and on what basis? Welfare, housing schemes, taxpayer-funded support, these are all built on an old and fairly simple idea that citizens contribute to the pot and citizens draw from the pot. But when a meaningful share of participants in schemes like the First Home Guarantee are not citizens, and pathways to citizenship remain slow and inconsistent, you end up with a genuinely awkward question nobody in Canberra wants to touch with a 10-foot pole, not because the answer is obvious, but because it forces politicians to define what civic belonging actually means in this country, and that is not a comfortable conversation to have on the 6 o'clock news. Which brings us to the part of this story that has genuinely stunned political analysts. One Nation, for years dismissed as a fringe vote magnet. Well, the numbers now tell an entirely different story. Recent national polling has had One Nation's primary vote climbing into the high 20s and even touching the low 30s, a staggering jump from where the party sat just a couple of years back. And here's the twist nobody predicted. It's not angry blokes in ute convoys driving this surge. It's women. Multiple independent polls this year have shown Pauline Hanson polling as the most popular party leader among Australian women, ahead of the Prime Minister himself. Think about that for a second. Grocery prices climbing faster than wages, insurance premiums that make your eyes water, promises of relief that never quite arrive at the checkout. Add to that a growing sense among many women that their concerns, whether about safety, identity, or simply being heard, are being talked over rather than listened to, and you get a political earthquake building quietly in the outer suburbs and increasingly, surprisingly, in wealthier postcodes too. This isn't a fringe grumble anymore. It's a genuine symptom of people feeling like the system stopped checking in with them a long time ago. So, when you connect the dots, rushed tax reforms with murky modelling, a Prime Minister benefiting from rules he's now closing off, an unresolved citizenship and welfare debate, and a major party leader suddenly topping the popularity charts with women nationwide, you're not looking at a handful of isolated headlines. You're looking at a trust problem. And trust, once it cracks, is remarkably hard to glue back together. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below.